Card games are played with cards. There are no character models or fancy animations. Instead, what you have are flat, two-dimensional pieces of cardboard that are meant to represent characters or events. Even in today's world, we don't have access to state-of-the-art hologram technology to simulate and project the scenes our cards depict. And while you do have digital card games that try to mitigate this, what remains is that they will still choose to use cards to represent practically everything. This is actually the root of the single greatest weakness of the genre, which is a huge lack of visualization. Because of this, card games are difficult to watch as a spectator sport, not easy to understand at a glance, and it's hard to learn for those unacquainted with the genre. That all said, good card games have a really creative aspect to them that I think is highlighted by this limitation, and that is flavor. First of all, no, flavor has nothing to do with how a card tastes, but instead, flavor describes a card's thematic context. Whether it's a character, location, or an event, flavor is both the subject depicted in the card and the fantasy world that surrounds it. In this video, I want to talk about and explain what flavor is exactly, how different card games express flavor, and you know what, just to spice it up a bit, why I think Magic does it better than Yu-Gi-Oh! So what is flavor? Flavor is often given explicitly through flavor text. Let's look at Lightning Bolt as an example, a classic Magic the Gathering card. The Spark Mage shrieked, calling on the rage of the storms of his youth. To his surprise, the sky responded with a fierce energy he'd never thought to see again. Besides the scene this text describes, you can infer how magic in this world can be cast and affected by raw feelings and emotions. Phyrexian Hulk has a very ominous and creepy flavor text that almost sounds like a nursery rhyme, which reads, "It doesn't think, it doesn't feel, it doesn't laugh or cry. All it does from dusk till dawn is make the soldiers die." Onean children's rhyme, which is super eerie, right? It brings to mind the image of a decaying wasteland surrounding this hulking machination of death. It also gives you an idea of its place of origin, Phyrexia, and expresses how familiar it is to the Oneans and how it was probably commonplace for soldiers to be ripped apart by this thing. But it's silly to say that that is the limit of flavor's ability. What if a card has no flavor text? Does it suddenly have no flavor? Well, the answer is absolutely not. Flavor not only exists in other genres, but it can be expressed through gameplay, and to me, that's honestly when it's most interesting and compelling. I think Mark Rosewater, Magic's lead designer, says it best. What makes Magic stand out so well over its competition is when flavor and function meet and synergize. Flavor isn't just simply lore. It also includes simple, practical concepts that you build your expectations around in a fantasy setting. The Greatsword in Monster Hunter isn't incredibly deep or storied, but it's super satisfying when you bring it down on the gigantic tail of a monster because everything about the action meets your expectations. You expect that thing to deal massive damage given its weight and how much your character needs to wind up in order to swing it, and when you land a good hit, you get that nice meaty hit stop effect that highlights the power of your blow. You see a chunk of the monster's tail fly off, and sometimes the monster stops whatever it's doing to fall over and wallow in pain. Your expectations of a gigantic monster being felled by your proportionally as gigantic weapon are being met, and this is shown through gameplay as big damage numbers and an opportunity to pile on even more damage. Card games don't have the capability of these fancy visuals, but that's what makes flavor so incredibly important to it. If you want people to love your game or original IP, then selling your fantasy world effectively goes a very long way. Immersing players create more valuable memories. While flavor is most commonly associated with flavor text and exposition through lore, it is one of the most boring ways to convey it. That's just my opinion, of course, but I know I'm not alone. One of the biggest criticisms about World of Warcraft and its lore is that it's too dependent on its books. I got a lot of criticism in my I'm Done with Master Duel video about how I totally discredited Yu-Gi-Oh's lore by claiming it to be not very flavorful. And so I want to squash that right now and say that a game, a card, or a mechanic can't be considered very flavorful if it cannot convey the flavor on its own. When the flavor is arbitrarily linked to a fan-translated book or otherwise external source of truth that I have to go out of my way to read, understand, and appreciate, how can that game element then be considered flavorful? The answer is that it can't, and when I made the claim, I wasn't attacking the lore. I was addressing how most Yu-Gi-Oh cards on their own aren't particularly flavorful because the art and name of a card often have little to nothing to do with the effect or mechanics of that card. It isn't always the case, but it's often enough. There are many things to like about how Yu-Gi-Oh expresses flavor, and we'll get to that in a bit, but basically what I'm trying to say is, as someone who primarily plays games for gameplay and not necessarily to immerse myself in a fantasy world, it is only when gameplay and mechanics tastefully deliver flavor is when I become immersed and completely motivated to binge watch multi-hour long playlists of Elden Ring lore. So now that we've answered what flavor is, let's move the subject to my favorite aspect of card games, and that is how card games use mechanics to convey flavor. Let's take a look at Magic's Color Pie. Magic's Color Pie is such an impactful core design concept that not only sets the foundation for both its mechanical and flavorful concepts, but a lot of card games also just try to copy this design, but they miss that key second part. White is the color of piety and holiness. You see angels in their creatures, and the cards often feature gameplay functions like healing and protection. Black is the color of death and decay, so its cards often reflect that by destroying creatures or raising the dead. Liliana Vess is a black planeswalker, and she fully embraces these ideas with her identity as an extremely powerful necromancer. And where it gets really cool is when you have color combinations. Take a look at the color combination of black and red. Red represents anger and impulsivity. This translates to gameplay as direct damage to a player's life total and a tendency for their creatures to be of low cost or with haste abilities. What's similar and highlighted between black and red are their destructive tendencies, which come together to form concepts like chaos, pain, and destruction. The player must often pay with their life total or with the lives of their creatures in order to produce powerful effects. Blue represents knowledge and curiosity, and green represents growth and nature. So when combined, they highlight ideas of rapid evolution and adaptability. This is shown through gameplay as the creatures growing in power with plus stat counters or replacing a creature entirely with a bigger one, which expresses the idea of metamorphosis. Magic's Color Pie is not just a convenient way to make different classes or playstyles, but it is also the framework that allows for flavor to be expressed through gameplay. Let's take a look at Resplendent Angel. This card has no flavor text, but as soon as we understand her effects and role in gameplay, we'll be able to tie that to her identity. To be resplendent is to be awe-inspiring and dazzling, and how Resplendent Angel reflects that is in her gameplay. She has the ability to boost her strength and gain life for the player, and if she accomplishes this task, she will inspire another angel to join her in battle. Resplendent Angel is a white-colored creature. Her abilities to empower herself, heal the player through battle, and recruit other angels are things that resonate with that color, and are also things you can reason out from her name and artwork. She embodies the idea of being resplendent by being a model angel, a paragon of their ideals, and thus she is able to easily rally others to her cause. It's a perfect and simple example of gameplay and mechanics supporting the flavor of the card. Flavor is not limited to individual cards. Sometimes you can have really powerful theming and flavor in other aspects of a card game. This is especially prevalent in Yu-Gi-Oh! A lot of its flavor is derived from the archetypes or group of cards as a whole, more than they are from the individual cards. And while this may not be to my preference, it is still a facet that is more prevalent in Yu-Gi-Oh! That I do still appreciate and enjoy. I think Yu-Gi-Oh! Has strong theming around gameplay mechanics with its archetypes, but I do not think that they are always flavorful or expressive of ideas and concepts. Let's look at a couple examples, starting with an archetype that I do think is flavorful, like Ritual Beasts. Ritual Beasts is an archetype that features two types of monsters in their group, Tamers and Beasts. they can quickly combine with each other to showcase beast riding and their level of synergy, and just as quickly they are able to separate in order to dodge abilities or accomplish tasks they can better do on their own. Beast and Tamer are never too far apart because they are way less effective without each other. So sometimes you have flavorful mechanical theming, and other times you have archetypes like Lightsworn. Lightsworn explores and is themed around the mechanics of milling, which is a term for taking a number of cards from the top of your deck and putting it into your graveyard. With Lightsworns, they do this in order to activate special powers and abilities. I have no idea how this ties to their themes of holiness or the angels they feature or are named after. I even asked ChatGPT what it thinks, and the best answer it could come up with was that milling symbolized sacrifice or harnessing light energy, which personally I'm not convinced. It's the most generic explanation for something that makes no intuitive sense. There's nothing holy or righteous about the deck, the act of milling, or the graveyard, and the sacrifice or harnessing is not mentioned anywhere in the lore. From what I can read of the 28 lines of Lightsworn's lore, they're basically just a fantasy take on the Justice League, answering prayers for peace from tyranny by injecting themselves into the narrative and beating up the bad guys, just with matching white outfits. The flavor and lore are totally divorced from the gameplay. All you have here are flashy character designs following one theme, and their abilities and effects following a totally different theme with little to no parallels. Milling is actually a term that originated from Magic, and comes from the card called Millstone. Millstone is a magical object that can force either player to mill a couple cards from the top of their deck to the graveyard. And while the original card art isn't especially flavorful, the flavor text at least explains that its explicit purpose as a magical device is to drive a mage insane. In Magic, you are a mage, and so your deck represents your unconscious mind containing a library of spells that you know. You draw the spells into your hand, which represents your conscious mind, that you can readily cast spells from. So the millstone is used to drive either player's mind into insanity and madness. A mad person is often called mindless, and the millstone accomplishes the idea of it being able to slowly deteriorate the mind both mechanically and flavorfully. You can see this beautifully illustrated in the recent printing of Millstone, a sculpture of a man's head and where his brain is supposed to be, replaced instead by a crude machine meant to grind his head and literally his entire being into dust. Now, I don't expect every application of milling to express something associated with these ideas, but you can see how the design of Millstone clearly had and has flavorful intent. Personally, I'm more of a fan of Tearlaments, an archetype also themed around milling. To me, their flavor is expressed a lot better than with Lightsworn. Tearlaments feature mermaids, and so you can at least draw parallels of milling with delving into the sea. The deck can represent the body of water the mermaids live in, and the graveyard where they will be milled to as the shore or a log of what you've encountered or explored. Once any Tearlament mermaid is milled into the graveyard, they have the option of returning to the deck in order to fuse into stronger Tearlament fusion monsters. Kitkalos is supposed to be a brainwashed overseer of the Tearlament mermaids, created from their collective sorrow in order to help enslave them. And their oppressive master, Reinoheart, exploits the mermaids in order to attain immortality. The movement of the mermaids from the graveyard and back into the deck can represent their sorrow combining to form Kitkalos, or their beings being exploited by Reinoheart in order to create his final grotesque form, that is Kaleidoheart. This is a lot better than the Holy Justice League in terms of mechanics expressing flavor. That said, the individual cards aren't very expressive of any flavor on their own still, and this flavor is totally dependent on external lore that I only convinced myself to read in order to make this video. This is why I don't prefer or consider Yu-Gi-Oh! The game to be as flavorful as Magic the Gathering. Not only do some archetypes like Lightsworn totally miss for me, but there's also that extra step of having to read the lore that often needs to be made in order to understand the flavor. It's also hard to grasp the flavor in Yu-Gi-Oh! Without having the entire archetype in perspective. I don't have to make these leaps when looking at a Magic card. All the flavor is often printed on the card itself, and that's what I prefer. I've almost never went out of my way to consume a piece of Magic lore, but I still have a good sense of what the personalities are behind the recurring characters like Jace or Sorin, and I'm able to understand the virtues and ideals of organizations like House Demir or the Azoria Senate. So that's why I made the distinction in my earlier video, and this is what I meant. I can appreciate Yu-Gi-Oh! Lore and flavor. I just think Magic does it better and in a way that I prefer. Now that that's out of the way, let's talk shit about other card games. Weiss Schwarz allows you to play an archetype themed after your favorite anime, but because it combines so many different universes and because they will reuse the same characters within the same archetype over and over, the character cards don't get to express a lot. Effects are so homogenized and repeated across several different characters from different universes that the community have multiple terms for roles and abilities that cards have, like runner, bomb, or any of the several abilities named after the characters themselves. Musashi is a term for an ability that creates a separate instance of damage if the damage from the first attack was cancelled. So think of it as a sort of piercing effect, and it's only named that way because Musashi is the name of the first character to feature this ability. This ability is then reprinted on a version of Saber from Fate's Stay Night, who I guess can match Musashi in terms of how stoic and badass they at least appear to be, but it's also printed on Tsushima Yoshiko, or you can call her Johanna, I think, in the anime. This character is from an idol anime, and she is definitely not stoic or badass in the slightest. There are plenty of flavorful cards in Weiss, especially with the special climax combos and within action anime a lot of the times, but a lot of them feel out of place because they're supposed to share the same arena and because there are so many versions of these characters. Another card game I want to mention is the One Piece card game. There are only so many characters in the One Piece universe, and so like Weiss Schwarz, there's going to be a lot of recycled characters. So when you have this, you'll often have multiple cards of these characters, and each card will feature one or a few abilities that only reflect a very small part of them. Nami usually has scrying effects, which let you look at a certain number of cards from the top of your deck to add one into your hand. So that can be related to her role as a navigator and her skills in foresight and the planning that comes with that. Some other characters also have that ability though, like Dadan, and I don't understand why she would have that ability. Sanji is also another character, and he's absolutely all over the place. Sometimes he has rush, sometimes he's a blocker, and so I guess you could say like, oh, he's a fighter, so he would have these kind of combat abilities, right? But he also has an ability to manipulate your life cards. So there's no consistency, there's no reasoning behind these effects. The effects mostly seem entirely based on the arbitrary cost and color of the card and whether or not the color or archetypes have space for that ability. Gameplay comes first and foremost, and flavor is far, far removed in the list of priorities. Flavor and function are very often not synergistic or just painfully shallow, and just like in Weiss, in terms of everything unrelated to gameplay, the only reasons you'd play a card is for the character and the artwork. That's not to say these card games are bad. I like One Piece's gameplay and I like the IP, and I'm sure the people who play Weiss Schwarz are thrilled to war with their husbandos and waifus. But the point was just to show how different their approach is to flavor from games like Magic and Yu-Gi-Oh! The reason why flavor is so noticeably scarce in One Piece and Weiss Schwarz, and why they make little to no attempt to build a world, illustrate a setting, or express characterization or ideas is because frankly that's the job of the anime they feature. Magic's whole universe is built through the card game and is extended upon by external media sources, and the Yu-Gi-Oh! Card game is basically a copy of that. So all Weiss Schwarz and One Piece need to do is print good-looking cards featuring beloved characters and they can call it a day. It's not very flavorful, but fine, not every card game needs to be. Personally, I think flavorful expression in card games goes a little underappreciated. So actually what I'm really interested in doing is creating a series of videos where all we do is talk about and appreciate the flavor of cards and card games. It'll be called Flavor Matters, and what we'll do is take this idea into different contexts. With Yu-Gi-Oh!, I'm thinking we can look at archetypes as a whole and try to interpret and connect flavor with mechanics. I think with games like Magic the Gathering and Lorcana or other card games, we can easily just open packs or review sets and talk about the flavor in the individual cards. If that sounds like a cool idea, make sure you leave a like on this video, subscribe to my channel so you can see it, follow my Twitch if you want to participate in Flavor Matters or whatever I call it live, and let me know in the comments what your favorite cards or mechanics are when it comes to expressing flavor. Plus, if you have any ideas on what you'd like to see a feature on for Flavor Matters, put that in there too. My name's Renu, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.